Hi everyone, and welcome to the tutorial for this super cute cat ear hat. It's really easy to make and super beginner friendly, so let's go ahead and get started. Here's what you'll need. Any worsted weight yarn. I used this acrylic gray yarn because that's what color my cat is. And the stitches should show up well for the tutorial. You're going to need some sort of scissors or snippers, anything that'll cut your yarn, a yarn needle that fits your yarn, and a 5mm crochet hook. You also could use some stitch markers. Those are optional though. So let's get started. We're going to start with a slip stitch and then loosely chain 71 chains. If you need more information on any of the stitches we use in this video, there should be tutorials linked down below. Now, what's going to be a little bit different with this chain right here is we're not going to want to have it super tight. So a standard chain, you're probably going to pull it like fully onto, like fully around your hook. Instead of doing that, we want to just pull it up just a smidge and make it a little bit looser. This is going to make it easier to work into later on, and it's going to make it a little bit stretchier. So don't worry about the chains being a little uneven. That will even out once we work into them. You're not even going to be able to tell. The only thing that matters is you want to make them just a little bit looser than how you normally would have them. And that's going to be really important later on. It'll make it much easier and it'll look much better. So I will meet you back here once we have chained 71. And I'll show you what to do next. I have my 71 chains here. As you can see, I did them pretty loose, not too loose, but loose enough that they're a little bit stretchier. And now you're about to see why that's important. So instead of working into the chain like you normally would from the front, we're going to work into the back loop. So we're going to start in the second chain from the hook. We're going to work half double crochets all the way across in the back loop only. So instead of going in the front like we normally would right here, instead of going in like this, we're going to flip it over and we're going to go into that little hump on the back there. So this is the most advanced thing we're going to do through this entire pattern. If this is a little bit more, if this is a little difficult for you, you can just go into it normally. All this does is make the finished product look a little bit smoother and cleaner, and it's going to make it easier to sew it together at the end. But that's all there is to it. We're just going to do a half double crochet. I'll show you that again here. We're going to yarn over, go through our back loop, yarn over, pull through all three. If you need more information on that, there will be videos linked below. We're going to go all the way across doing this for 70 stitches. So I'll just show you, you see the bottom bit here? The reason why we're working into the back loop is so that we have those nice clean stitches. It looks the same as a stitch does from the top. So that's going to make it easier for us to sew it together evenly. And as you can see, it's totally evening out. You can't even tell that my chain was a little bit uneven, the way that it pulls when you do it into the back loop. So it looks totally fine, totally clean. It's not too stressful. So we're just going to do those 70 stitches, so those 70 half double crochets all the way across, and I will meet you back when we've finished the row. This is just an optional step for if you hate tying in loose ends like I do. You can totally skip this, do everything normally, and then just tie in your loose end once you finish your project. But this is how I do it, just to avoid that, because loose ends are the bane of my existence. So we're just going to start our stitch normally. You know, yarn over, go through, yarn over, pull through, and then we're going to, instead of just picking up our working yarn, we're going to yarn over with our working yarn and our tail. And then we're going to just we're just gonna pull it right on through. So grab both and then pull it through. I like to just pull it up. Then you see that goes loose. We can pull it back down to size. We're gonna chain 1 to step up our round. And then we're going to turn our work and crochet over our tail right there. So the second row is just 70 half double crochets across. We're just going to do a half double crochet in every stitch. If you want to, optionally, you can go into the back loop only of these stitches, and that's going to make a ridged, more kind of knitted look if that's what you'd prefer. To keep things simple for the tutorial, and because I prefer it to look flatter and not so ridged, I'm just going to work into the stitches normally. So all we're going to do is crochet around the tail here. Just leave it on top of your stitch, crochet around it, and that's just going to tie it in as you go. That way you're not going to have to worry about it later. It's very secure in my experience, and it just saves me a little bit of hassle at the end of the project. So all we're doing is normal half double crochets all the way across. There should be a count of 70 for the entire row. And I will meet you back here at the end. I'm just going to show you a little trick to fix a problem that a lot of beginners have. So I know that a lot of beginners have trouble keeping their edges straight. So we are going to be working into our previous half double crochets and not into the chain that's at the start of each round. But if you have trouble keeping these stitches even, and you don't want to have to count your rows every single time, because you don't want to have to count 70 stitches every row, right? So if this is an issue for you, just take a stitch marker and you're going to put it in your first stitch of every row. So like normal, we're going to step up with the chain 1, we're going to turn our work, we're going to do our first half double crochet in our first stitch there, and then we're going to take this stitch marker. You can also use a piece of yarn if you don't have a stitch marker, and we're just going to put that in our first stitch. Now, ideally you'd have 2, you'd have 1 in each side, so then every time you get to the end, you know exactly where your last stitch is without having to sit there and count every row. This is just a common problem that I see a lot of beginners having, so this is just a really simple solution if this is something that you struggle with. It just makes things a little bit easier. We're going to continue on for 23 more rows of just a half double crochet in every stitch. So you should have a total of 25 rows of 70 half double crochets with a chain 1 to start each row. And that's really all there is to it. It's a super easy pattern. So once we finish 25 rows, I will come back and show you how to sew it all together. We're almost done. This is what it should look like when you've completed your 25 rows of half double crochets. We're going to tie off, leaving enough yarn to sew up one side of the hat. So I like to use about double the length that I'm sewing, just to make sure that I have enough. So we're just going to fold it over. All I'm doing here is just taking it and folding it over. We are going to start sewing up one side. Now, if you're a sewer, you're probably going to have the instinct to turn it inside out, sew it up, and then flip it right side out once you finish sewing it. That's not what we're going to do here. We are going to leave it facing right side out. We're going to sew it with its right side out. You want the good side out when we sew it. So the reason that we're doing this is it's going to give it a more square and sharp angle at those top cat ear pieces. We want those cat ears to be nice and flat. So super easy. This is why we crocheted into the back loop of our chain. so that we would have these nice perfect little stitches to sew into. So just go under, start with the very edge ones, your first and last stitches, and just go under those V's. We're just going to go back and forth under these little stitches, the V stitches, as long as you make sure you pair it up 1 and 1 stitches, one from each side, don't skip any on either side. Then you're going to have, we have an even row of stitches, an even number of stitches, so it's going to be even. This is why I like doing my starting chain that way, working into my starting chain the way that I do, so that it gives us this nice clean finished look when we sew it together, and it just makes it a lot easier to make it even. So just continue sewing up this side of the hat, and I'll show you how I like to tie off my yarn once we get to the end. Okay, here we are. I finished sewing up my edge. I already ran the yarn through to the inside of the hat. So what I'm going to do is just flip it inside out, and I'm going to tie a little knot. We're just going to put it through one of the stitches so that it doesn't show through the outside, and we're just going to tie a little knot. That's all there is to it. You can tie off in any method that you want to. This is just how I do it. But I like to just tie a little knot. We're going to do it again. Tie a little knot to make sure it's secure. After our knot is tied, we can run in that loose end. This will leave it nice and secure. So if you don't know how to run in your loose end, here's just a quick little tutorial on how to do it. So I like to just make sure I go into the stitches. I like to move it to where a row is, and then just move it through the half double crochets. You're going to want it in between the stitch so that it's not like poking out on either side, and you're just going to go down the row. You're going to hop over to another row and go back in the other direction, and that's just going to lock it into place. Now that we finished sewing up our first side, I have flipped it back right side out. So we're going to sew up the other end. So I just cut a piece of yarn that was long enough to sew up this side. And let me just show you how I tie it on. You can attach your yarn in whatever way you want. So I don't like to go on the very tip. I like to go in the base of the outer row stitch. It's not going to show on the outside, so just through it right there. I like to make sure I pick up at least 2 loops of yarn so it's a little bit more secure. And I'm just going to tie it in a knot just to tie it on here. I just tie the knot with the end there. Just tie it a couple of times to make sure it's secure, and then all we're going to do is run it in. We're going to take and go into the next stitch over, and we're going to take, after we run this through this next stitch like we do. So you can see I have to move it to get the right angle, but we're going to run our needle through, pull it right there. Once we're done sewing it in, when we go to tie in our loose end here, I'm going to tie that loose end into the same stitch that I just put my yarn through. That's going to just make sure that the knot goes all the way in there, and it's going to hide it perfectly so that it won't show. So then we're going to go not through the exact same way we just did. We want to skip over at least a piece of yarn, at least a loop, so that it locks it in, so that we don't just pull out the stitch we made. We're going to move our yarn down to the very edge again, so that we can get those last 2 stitches. We want to do the first stitch of that round and the last stitch of that round, just like we did before. We're going to sew those 2 stitches together, and we're just going to keep going like we sewed up the first half. Just go under each stitch and sew it together back and forth. It is quite simple. Just finish it off the same way you finished off the other one, run in your loose ends, and then your hat's going to be complete. That's pretty much all there is to it. I will come back to show you the end result. here's our finished hat. I have sewed up both sides. I tied in all my loose ends. And this is what it looks like finished. We can fold up the little edge here. You can fold it to whatever length you like, depending on how it fits on your head. And that's all there is to it. I'm going to show you a clip of it done at the end here, but I want to thank you for watching my tutorial. I hope that you leave a comment, tell me how you liked it, tell me if there's anything that you didn't understand and you need some clarification on. And I hope that you like the video and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching.